The bioregional movement has a surge of energy right now, maybe unlike anything it's seen before. And I have created this book to be in service to that movement, to resource that movement, to enable it to catalyze regenerative action around the world at a time when many people are feeling quite hopeless. I believe that the bioregional movement can bring renewed energy to our purpose in stewarding this beautiful earth that we get to call home.
Welcome. Today we have a very special episode. We are here with Samantha Power. Samantha is just launching her new book, Bioregional Financing Facilities, Driving Finance for Regeneration. Samantha is a friend to the show, a familiar face on the channel. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me back, Matthew. Really excited to discuss this book with you and all the ways we can work together to bring these ideas into the world.
This has been a huge body of work that you've spearheaded. Congratulations. How does it feel to finally be at the finish line or the starting line?
Both and, I would say. It feels really good. It's been a long journey to get to this point. I've been writing for probably 8 months intensively now, together with my co-author, Leon Seafield from Dark Matter Labs, and many collaborators and advisors that have fed into the book. And I've been thinking about the ideas, arguably, for my entire professional life. And I have never felt as clear about anything as I do about the proposal that is this book. And I'm really excited to share it with the world, to get feedback from people, and to figure out how we can start to design, build, and implement these bioregional financing facilities ready for the prototyping phase.
So it sounds like it's kind of a culmination of your background and your work and your experience. Was there also like a hit of inspiration that really brought this forward?
I would say many. Over the years, there was a lot of trying to change where money was flowing from the top down, as I've talked about in my previous discussions with you, and running into dead ends over and over again during my time at the World Bank and running a working group for the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, advising the central banks network for greening the financial system, participating in the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group. I tried many different avenues over my more than 5 years of working at the World Bank to really change the direction of financial flows so that they would support life and the transition to a regenerative economy. And after years of trying to create those shifts, I felt a little bit cynical and frustrated about the pace of change and the need for money to get to regenerators, the people doing the most urgent work in the world now of stewarding our lands and waters and healing places and listening to what places need to become sacred again where they've been desecrated. And after years of that, I moved out to the Bay Area where we are now having this conversation, launched Finance for Gaia, and I wasn't exactly sure what direction the work was going to take me in, but I knew I needed to get closer to the land. And the inspiration has come from talking to people that are running land and water stewardship projects and listening to so many amazing Indigenous communities around the world that are doing incredible bridge building work to work with Western scientists and finance and policymakers to envision a path forward that we can all walk together. And in addition to listening to all those amazing people, I've also been doing a lot of listening to the land and the waters myself. The redwoods are one of the main reasons I moved to the Bay Area. They are one of my favorite species in the world and such an old and powerful tree. And I've been spending a lot of time in old growth redwood groves over the past couple of years. And those places have inspired me just as much as many of the conversations I've had.
Mm. Okay, well, I have so many questions. Bioregional financing facilities, BFFs, this is how you've kind of framed it at a high level. Maybe we start there, and then I'd love to ask you a bit more about, why this is such an important idea or solution set for this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so bioregional financing facilities are kind of my response to the poly crisis and the increasing concentration of wealth that our current economic system is driving, and the lack of resources that regenerative projects around the world have access to. And bioregional financing facilities have three core objectives. One is to decentralize financial resource governance, so putting finance in the hands of people that are living in relationship to place, and allowing them to use their wisdom and relationships to determine how finance should flow to support regeneration in that place. They also enable the organization of a synergistic web of projects in the bioregion. So from the finance perspective, there aren't yet well-organized, aggregated portfolios of bioregional projects in places for them to invest in. So bioregional financing facilities enable that organization to take place. And then third, they support the transition to a regenerative economy, which right now I see us as in a kind of monoculture capitalist economy that is driving how things are valued around the world, and as a result is kind of driving this sucking up of the earth and turning it into money as fast as we can. That is the attractor of the current economic system. And I have a vision that we move to, it's essentially a return to a biodiversity of economies connected to place around the world. So small, more sovereign, locally governed economies that can interact with each other and trade with each other, but from a place of first understanding what the bioregion can provide in terms of resources to support the economy there.
Yeah, and I wrote down this quote that you said, while on the surface it might seem promising that more financial resources are allocated towards nature restoration, there is a significant risk that if these resources flow through the existing financial architecture, they could lead to further commodification, privatization, financialization, and centralization of natural assets and wealth. So is that what's driving this desire to create a structure that's really decentralizing in its nature?
Absolutely. For many years at the World Bank, I was working on developing the nature finance agenda there. My colleagues and I published a paper in 2020 called Mobilizing Private Finance for Nature. This work was developed in the lead up to COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity in late 2022. And there was a very vibrant discussion blossoming around how we mobilize more finance to flow to nature conservation and regeneration, and a recognition that we would not achieve any of the ambitious targets being set out in the Global Biodiversity Framework without private sector capital flowing to regenerative efforts. And traditionally, conservation funding has mostly been in the public sector domain and the philanthropic domain.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was doing this work over years and, looking at biodiversity credits and natural asset companies and advising investors that were building private equity funds focused on nature, I was seeing the same patterns of the kind of extractive, destructive economy that these people are all trying to break out of, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But those same patterns and ownership and governance structures were being applied in these kind of natural capital focused models. And something in me, my intuition was just telling me, like, this is off. There might be unintended consequences here, and it's the natural world, the sacred life on our planet that is at stake, and we need to proceed with a lot of caution. And perhaps the traditional financing structures that we've used to finance energy and infrastructure and other types of activities that can be regenerative aren't as well suited to funding assets that are in the commons, right? Our natural assets. And so that's, when I started down this inquiry of, like, what would it look like to decentralize financial decision making, and how do we put people that are connected to place and listening to place in charge of how those resources flow. And absolutely, there's a role for large investors and large public funders. And I saw the need for this connective tissue between this increasingly concentrated pool of financial resources. And I have a diagram where the financial resources are kind of concentrated in the leaves of the tree. And the mycelial web of regeneration is underground and cannot be seen often by the people that are holding those resources. And I felt the need for this connective tissue between those two things to enable the regenerative benefits of all the projects to flow to capital. And, I've worked with so many amazing people that want to put their capital in service to regeneration. And, we bring back down resources that have often been extracted from these communities to their projects so people can deepen and expand their really urgent and critical work.
And for communities, individuals who are on the ground doing their best to scrap together some dollars for some sort of regenerative activity, I think for many it would be a bit surprising to hear, or not intuitive to hear, that there are these billions and billions of dollars that are concentrating, trying to invest in nature, because they're not seeing it. And obviously this is part of the problem you're seeking to address. But also, can you paint us a picture for, like, where are those billions of dollars coming from? And what are some of the latest trends that's causing this? And why do you think it's going to continue?
Yeah, no, I love this question, Matthew. A lot of my research while I was at the World Bank was focused on looking at the economic and financial risks associated with the destruction of the biosphere. And I think we can link in the show notes to some of the papers that I wrote on that. But there is this increasing awareness that our economic system, as it's currently structured, cannot sustain itself. It cannot continue. The biosphere is the foundation of the economy, the foundation of our social system. And if we don't regenerate it, the whole house of cards is going to collapse. And this is becoming more palpable all the time. Every disaster that happens, there are, unprecedented payouts from insurance companies, and there is a realization, by financial decision makers at the highest level, both on the policymaker side, but also in the private sector, that we need to do something radically different. And yet, the structures in which those decision makers are envisioning possible futures keep them stuck, and I see them making very incremental shifts that are not commensurate to the scale of the problem, which they have acknowledged. So this realization is what's driving more capital being allocated to that. So there's a regulatory component where investors and private sector companies are seeing regulation, coming down the pipeline, and they are trying to get ahead of that and starting to measure their impacts and dependencies on nature and report on that, and start to transition to nature positive practices. There's a big movement around nature positivity in the corporate sector, and many financial institutions that see, particularly long-term investors like pension funds, they need to pay out pensions for people that are quite young right now. And if they are going to, meet their fiduciary duty responsibilities and do that, they need to be thinking long-term, and they need to be thinking about regeneration. So those are some of the factors that's driving more money to flow into this space. I also think there's a bit of a Wild West phenomena where, capitalists are doing their thing, and basically there is an opportunity to build a new asset class, and they're coming in and trying to find an opportunity to do good and do well, maybe not in a very place-based or conscious way. So those are some of the shifts that I see happening, and regenerators, as you've mentioned, Matthew, are not seeing this money flow. And another large pool of funding that I think has the power to reach regenerators is this $20 billion a year starting next year that countries from the global north have committed to countries in the global south to support them in meeting the targets laid out in the global biodiversity framework. And we can link to that in the show notes. And it's meant to scale up to $30 billion a year by 2030. And this money, absolutely should be flowing to activities happening on the land and in the waters. And right now, the mechanisms for it to flow being discussed are multilateral, right? It would flow to the Global Environment Facility, and then to nation-state governments, maybe to subnational governments, and then eventually to people that are doing land stewardship work and Indigenous communities. And the more time I've spent listening to people that are stewarding regenerative projects, and particularly with Indigenous communities and First Nations here in the United States, the more I understand how problematic that is, and the power dynamics inherent in that, and just the lack of efficiency that comes with money having to flow through so many layers of bureaucracy. And what I'm proposing with bioregional financing facilities is that a very efficient and transparent way for money to get to regenerative projects is through bioregional financing facilities. And in the book, we lay out 12 attributes of what a bioregional financing facility is. And beyond that, the structure is kind of emergent in a place. But transparency and accountability are really key components of creating a bioregional financing facility. And as I've heard over and over again from investors and philanthropists and governments about there being nowhere for the money to flow, I felt compelled to create an institution, a new type of institution, of which there can be, one or multiple in every bioregion on Earth, that can be created to be ready to receive that capital so that it can be composted to support the transition to more place-based regenerative economies.
Excellent. I would echo the observation that it does seem like there's tens of billions, hundreds of billions, trillions of capital that's going to be looking with increasing ferocity of how to invest in nature that has the tendencies to, because of our existing financial structures, aggregate in multinational corporations, large NGOs, nation-state administrative, bureaucratic, slow, clunky institutional constellations. And we need to find better ways to distribute that capital and to allocate it. And you can look at the recent COP, all the announcements of different funds that countries, were committing to different aspects of biodiversity and nature investments. And, you read through the list and you're like, 20 billion here and 5 billion here and 15 billion here. And you're like, where's all this money actually going?
Where's it going? Yeah.
Right? Or you can look at the Inflation Reduction Act, like over $1 trillion of capital that's getting unleashed with one congressional act. And my feeling of the future of the world personally is like, there's going to be more and more extreme dislocations, and those things are going to be in relationship with extreme weather events and massive, displacements of humans, and all of these things that are terrifying, of course. And governments are going to have these kinds of knee-jerk dislocation responses, and we don't really have many other ways to respond than we'll throw money at it. And where do we throw that money? What are the existing things that can actually capture that? What are the water catchments where we can pool funds to respond to these crises? And that will happen in kind of, unpredictable ways all over the world in different jurisdictions and so forth. But now is the time to make sure that we're cultivating those water catchments, that we're getting things ready for that distribution of funds, especially from a monetary, lens. We know that the history of fiat currencies tend to kind of accelerate in their debt-based printing in these types of environments. So, yeah, it's just a way of agreeing with your thesis through my lens. And so would love to talk about, the nuts and bolts of these BFFs. Want to just give you space to respond to anything I just said, and then I'll ask you another question.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I think you're well on your way to getting your PhD in bioregional finance.
I am not an economist, but I play one on the internet.
And we are all grateful for you doing that. Absolutely, resilience is a key objective of bioregional financing facilities. And, you've mentioned after a disaster, governments are often looking to deploy financial resources really quickly to places that have been struck by disaster. And if there's not organizing on the ground and an entity that's ready to receive those resources and disseminate them in a strategic, coordinated, transparent way, you lose a lot of time and you lose a lot of efficiency. And, there are countless reports after natural disasters of money, flowing to corporations, and it's just profit, right? The whole disaster relief industry is really rife with problems and corruption often. And these bioregional financing facilities would be in place, ready to receive that funding. And they will have a mandate to support the development of resilience so that when those disasters happen, they are not as impactful. They will support mutual aid and coordination. And I envision every bioregional financing facility having an Earth monitoring dashboard that is open, where you have a mixture of citizen science, indigenous ways of knowing, Western science, remote sensing, eDNA, bioacoustics, like the most cutting edge Earth monitoring technology together with deep ways of knowing and sensing what's happening on the land in one place so that the citizens of the bioregion know what's happening there and can monitor it, during a drought, during extreme rain events, and can respond accordingly. And one of the things you mentioned earlier brought up for me kind of the risk frameworks that a lot of capital is using to determine how they deploy their resources. And that is why, in large part, it's flowing to more traditional institutions, venture capital, private equity, multilaterals, as opposed to aggregated portfolios of projects. The risk frameworks that the financial sector is using are backward looking. They're also oftentimes based in modern portfolio theory, which says that investors have no impact on systemic risk. So they shouldn't bother paying attention to systemic risk. They can only focus on idiosyncratic risk associated with a particular investment, which, we know that's not the case. And I see these bioregional financing facilities as being able to support the development of new risk models that look at risk in a much more dynamic and contextual way, and respond to those risks as a result. And they will also look at returns beyond just financial returns. So the 4 types of returns we look at in the paper are financial and economic, social, ecological, and inspiration. And when you're taking a more holistic framework to how you're assessing the returns of your investments, you view risk differently and you make different investments. And as a result, you're able, as a traditional institutional investor, say a pension fund, to make the case for investing in entities like a bioregional financing facility and a portfolio of regenerative projects, where if you're using more conventional risk metrics, you might say, those projects are too risky.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to ask you more about that and the integrated capital stack. But just taking a step back, can you help just define bioregion a bit more?
Absolutely. Happy to. And if your viewers and listeners checked out our most recent conversation with Stuart Cowan, we talk about it in that conversation a little bit as well. A bioregion is a place that is defined by hard lines, soft lines, and human lines. I've learned from my friend and colleague Brandon Letzinger from Regenerate Cascadia, who writes a lot about bioregional mapping. If your viewers and listeners want to learn more, definitely check out what Brandon and his team are up to. So the hard lines are geological lines. They are mountain ranges and plateaus and the edges of continents and, the rock that makes up the earth. The soft lines are ecological lines, vegetation, animal and insect migration, watersheds. And the human lines are cultural lines. And I have really enjoyed looking at maps of Indigenous territories and Indigenous languages and how closely those overlap with ecology. And to develop a map of a bioregion, I recommend a bioregional organizing team. So a few people in a bioregion that say, we want to create a nature state here, bring together key actors from different disciplines and and towns and cities across the bioregion to layer these maps on top of each other and determine a boundary that makes sense and aligns with the understanding of those people, of what their place is. And I actually have a definition for place here that we include in the book that I would love to read to you. And this comes from our friend John Fullerton at the Capital Institute. Place is where geographic reality and human culture intersect. It is the foundation for culture and economy. And I see Bioregion as an entity that is really embodying that understanding and notion of place. And the reason why I've been so drawn to bioregionalism and bioregions is kind of the fractal organizing entity for financial resource governance is that I see a lot of challenge with reforming economic and financial systems in our current political paradigm. In the United States, certainly. I spent 7 years in DC and experienced that firsthand. But around the world, politics have reached a peak of polarization in many countries. And there is not meaningful change happening there. There is not a response to the ecological crisis or the polycrisis at a scale that many of us believe is commensurate to the urgency of the challenges unfolding. And I believe that bioregions can develop their own governing entities, which can act as a sort of parallel organizing structure to nation-state governments and subnational governments that is rooted in driving resilience and regeneration and is much more grassroots and much more participatory. Democracies in the modern world have led a lot of us to believe that all we need to do is vote every other year and we're doing our part to participate. But regenerating the living world requires much more engagement than that. And there are many people like you and I, Matthew, who want to be a part of stewarding and regenerating our places and want to weave together many regenerators across the landscape to develop what I call in the paper a bioregional regeneration strategy, which is where people in a bioregion will come together, maybe in a bioregional congress, to develop a 20 to 100-year vision, maybe a 7-generation vision for what they would like that place to look like and to feel like, and how they would like their children and their grandchildren's lives to look growing up there. And that bioregional regeneration strategy then becomes a key governance document for the bioregion, which absolutely can operate in parallel to existing authorities and cooperate with existing authorities and support municipal governments, state governments, national governments to direct resources to community-led regenerative projects, which, as we talked about in our last conversation, they're really struggling with right now.
Yeah, I love this quote that you also included from Tyson Yunkaporta. We have this understanding of right story and wrong story is story with no place. For example, economics is a story or a collection of stories, but they are placeless stories. Yeah, the task to reinvigorate local civic participation and coordination is immense, right? Like you said, we've come to believe that democracy is voting every few years. Even our voting participation rates are staggeringly low. And, a lot of us don't know our neighbors. We don't even know the people that live right next to us, let alone be kind of enmeshed in sophisticated coordination for the regeneration of our watersheds and our foodscapes, and all the things that we have to do to be in contact with the earth and to respond to the context we're in. And so, yeah, I sit with that question of like, well, what does that turnaround look like? What does that reinvigoration of local civic participation require? And this notion of having a context to come together around participatory budgeting and governance, to me, feels like one of the clearest ways to start that journey.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be a lot of resources, but if there's a pool of funds that is now earmarked for a given place, all of a sudden these other questions start to come to the surface of, well, how are we making these decisions? Who's making these decisions? Well, what are our values? Well, what's our plan? How are we determining what our plan is? And it just starts to unravel. And if we can find ourselves in a locally iterative but somewhat accelerated, given the context, way of then being able to budget and make decisions about funds for our local place, I just feel like that's a beautiful on-ramp towards a change in those patterns. So am I kind of experiencing it similar to your vision?
Yeah, that's absolutely what I see. And a lot of the bioregional organizing work happening that I have observed is happening with almost no funding.
Right.
It's people doing it in their spare time. And I think we'll get into it in a second, but there are 4 types of bioregional financing facilities. And the first one is a bioregional trust that it basically operates as a catalytic grant fund, and it can fund those early activation and organization activities to bring people together to develop the bioregional regeneration strategy, which becomes the guiding document for the bioregion and for each of the bioregional financing facilities. It's what enables those financing facilities to be purpose-focused and to invest with that as their mandate. And you need resources to enable that to happen. That is honestly, I think, the hardest part. But
the hardest part being that first catalytic fund.
Yeah, getting people organized, right? Like oftentimes, people are working in silos. There's a lot of amazing regenerative projects happening across the landscape, but they're not connected. So bringing people together to develop a vision that they can all agree on. And this is why we recommend that the strategy is a minimum of a 20-year plan, but hopefully more towards a 100-year plan, is because I really believe that once we start to look at what's possible in the long term and what we want, you see a lot more convergence. In the short term, people might be kind of stuck in their scarcity mentality and zero-sum ways of thinking that, it's in California, for instance, agriculture and kind of conservation, watershed restoration, indigenous rights are often at odds. But if you look at what regeneration and the development of a thriving local food system looks like at the 20 to 30, 100-year time frame, you see those interests kind of converging. So that's why we recommend that bioregions use like a longer term horizon to develop the strategy. And then once the strategy is in place, there is more, I think, trust in the people that will be governing the financial resources in terms of where they flow, that they are flowing to the projects and the organizations that are most aligned with that long-term strategy, and that eventually there will be abundance and access to resources for everyone. And it's just a game of sequencing and doing the right things at the right time.
So we're not expecting nation states overnight to suddenly give a bunch of money to all of these different bioregional catalytic funds. So it seems like the philanthropic community is really well positioned here to be some of those early visionary catalysts to say, okay, we have a group of people energy building in this particular place. Let's start to catalyze the conversation around what are our plans for resilience and regeneration in our bioregion, and to really kick that process off. Is that how you're seeing it?
Yes, I think philanthropy is going to play a really important early catalytic role, and already is, by funding research on bioregional financing facilities and funding, my next phase of kind of piloting these facilities. But I think that there is a need right now for us to move so quickly that there could be a powerful rationale for even nation state governments or subnational governments or return seeking investors to invest in these facilities. I'm not prescriptive on what capital flows in what order. I think particularly right now in the United States, with all of the money available through the Inflation Reduction Act, there's potential for these bioregional financing facilities to be spun up quite quickly and apply to grant funding available through that. Another source of capital that I'm really excited about is donor-advised funds and their ability to invest in bioregional financing facilities. My colleague Johnny Mayer from Ethic, who's been on the show before, and I have been talking a lot about this. The majority of donor-advised funds are just sitting in investments that are often not aligned with the values of the donors that donated them. And there's potential for that capital to be invested in bioregional financing facilities and, perhaps to generate a range of different returns, and also to donate to bioregional financing facilities. And I've seen multiple investors that are interested in investing in these sooner rather than later. Maybe initially as like kind of a pilot, an experiment. They might consider it as a grant, but they're testing it out to figure out how they can deploy larger pools of capital into these facilities at a later date.
Yeah. I mean, I think what compels me to feel like this is possible is in an accelerated, fashion as well, is that there are so many silos in our current existing financial system. The philanthropic capital sits over here. The endowments get invested over there. There's actually remarkably few options for a lot of people in terms of where they invest their dollars, whether it's in retirement accounts or donor-advised funds and so forth, where it's like, you can do anything as long as it's one of these BlackRock funds and as long as it's in a 60-40 stock portfolio.
Lack of imagination, Matthew. It's going to kill us.
And it's like, well, no, I want to invest in Upper Hutt, my local town. I want to invest in my place, right? And I want to do some low interest loans over here to the school, or I want to, and like there are some municipal bonds and things once you really dig in. But in general, I would say that the lack of imagination, the lack of options severely hinders a large amount of the intelligence that can be applied. And that intelligence can unlock, quote unquote, profit by, really bringing us closer to where our money flows. We may see that this project in the local town absolutely has good ability to pay back a loan, for example. Okay, if we finance solar panels over here in this particular context, like I know that's gonna model out, and to bring that capital together with things like philanthropic capital, this blended finance where we're actually combining things synergistically. Well, now all of a sudden a lot more is possible. So I guess it's just a long-winded way of saying, I think if we break down the silos and we relocalize the relationships, that there's going to be a lot more possible with how the flow of funds really works.
Absolutely. And one of the objectives of bioregional financing facilities is to find a way for capital providers to build relationships with the places they're investing in. We talk about the need for them to go and visit those places and partake in regeneration projects and ceremony and town halls and citizens' assemblies, and to really build a relationship with that place. And right now, in our current kind of global capitalist system, there is not a strong relationship between capital that is provided in the places that it's invested in. There's a deep abstraction that a lot of Indigenous leaders warn us about, that Tyson Yunkaporta quote that you read earlier speaks to this. Abstraction separates us from what is real, from the earth that is an extension of our body and sustains us. And as we move into a type of financial system that I hope is more relational, we are going to make better decisions, more efficient decisions, even about how that capital is deployed.
So the paper lays out 4 types of bioregional financing facilities. Can you walk us through those?
Yeah. The first one I call a bioregional trust. And we say in the paper that this entity uses trust in the traditional financial sense of the word, but also in the relational sense of the word. I have heard from some of my Indigenous colleagues, particularly in the United States, that the word trust is very loaded for them because there is public capital that is meant to serve Indian country that is locked up in a trust that is governed by the US government and they haven't had access to. So I really want to reclaim that word and build a bioregional trust that supports the relational fabric of a place. So the bioregional trust is a catalytic grant facility that supports everything from organization and activation of a bioregion to supporting, initial regenerative projects and organizations to get off the ground. It can also fund the creation of other bioregional financing facilities, and I'll talk a bit about that. It can hold assets in a commons. So I draw in another report on common asset trusts, which is an entity where you can put forests or a watershed in a commons, and you can create a monitoring framework and a payment and compensation framework where anyone that takes out of the trust has to pay in, and anyone that regenerates the trust gets paid. The bioregional trust can also support the development of eco-credits. So I know Gregory Landway and many of the friends from Regen Network have been on the show before, and I really see the bioregional trust as being able to steward a process of designing a very place-based methodology for eco-credits and then aggregating together a portfolio of credits and finding the appropriate buyers for those credits. The second bioregional financing facility is a bioregional venture studio, which I'm very excited about. And the venture studio essentially would incubate cohorts of entrepreneurs that build organizations that work together synergistically to shift a lever in the system. So it will focus on a specific aspect of systems change in the bioregion, and they will work together rather than, kind of independent entrepreneurs to figure out how to bring about that systems change in the bioregion. The third is a bioregional investment company that would develop systemic investment funds, which, are likely thematic, but could also be geographic in a large bioregion. And those funds would enable financial returns. So this is where kind of the return-seeking capital flows in. The bioregional investment company could also issue bioregional bonds that support the regeneration of the bioregion. So drawing on the long track record of muni bonds, particularly in the United States, to design those bonds. And, in the event of an economic downturn, an entity like a central bank could even buy up a bunch of bioregional regeneration bonds from across bioregional financing facilities. And last bioregional financing facility is the Bioregional Bank, which I'm very excited about. I drew a lot on the literature of CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, to develop the template for bioregional banks. So they would provide low-interest loans, technical assistance, lines of credit to regenerative organizations in the bioregion. They could also provide retail banking services. So eventually bioregions are less dependent on external capital and they're resourcing from within the bioregion. And very excited that bioregional banks could also issue nature-based currencies or other complementary currencies. So I've been thinking about a currency backed by the health of a wild bison population or salmon or the health of a river. But here's where we're able to integrate alternative methods of assessing value that are more aligned with the values of the people in the bioregion and integrating that into the financial system at the bioregional level.
Can you point to any financial innovations that you're seeing or excited about in this movement?
Yeah, absolutely. I am so excited about the potential of eco credits. I know you had Gregory Landway and Atosa Saltani on to talk about the Jaguar Credit Project in the Amazon recently. I find that fascinating and would love to replicate that in some other bioregions. So there's a case study on Regen Network, which I really recommend folks check out. I've also been having some interesting conversations with Austin Wade Smith about the potential for mountains or rivers or forests to have their own wallets. So they really are resourced to be sovereign entities, and their intrinsic value has money behind it to protect it. So I'm very excited about that. There is a lot happening in the world of nature-based currencies. Our friend John Clippinger has been doing some research on how active inference AI can inform the design of nature-based currencies. And I'm hoping John and I can find a place to play to design a nature-based currency as part of a bioregional bank. And I am also excited about all of the Web3 applications around capital allocation. So quadratic voting, quadratic funding, retroactive public goods compensation. And there are a few examples on this in the paper that I recommend folks check out.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the other attributes that you mentioned of these financing facilities?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So we try not to be too prescriptive in the book, right? I mentioned this. Bioregional financing facilities will reflect local context, the collective intelligence of that place. That is a key part of the design, is that they reflect what the people in a place believe is needed to support regeneration. But we believe that 12 attributes are universal and that all bioregional financing facilities should move towards embodying these 12 attributes over time, if not from the outset. And I also want to say before I read them that we profile in the report case studies of financial institutions doing a lot of this work already. And so bioregional financing facilities are not something that necessarily has to be built from scratch. There's absolutely potential to work with an existing organization, institution, and maybe adapt it a little bit so that it becomes a true bioregional financing facility. But the 12 attributes that my co-author and I identified are: one, bioregional financing facilities should aim to align with living systems principles and indigenous wisdom. This one is really important and, will be a dynamic and ongoing process for the bioregional financing facility. Second is that they serve the realization of the bioregional regeneration strategy. We've talked a lot about this. So this is where kind of being a purpose-focused financial institution is baked in. Third is that they implement an inclusive and participatory governance structure that represents the bioregion. This is really important for building trust, both within the bioregion and with external capital. If bioregional financing facilities want to be able to access, perhaps that multilateral capital flowing through the global biodiversity framework, this is really important. Fourth is that they work to shift power imbalances. And this is critical. I've spoken to you before, Matthew, about my study of power, where it is, who has it, how they use it, and how we redistribute it to better empower peoples that have been marginalized. And this is a key action that bioregional financing facilities have to take. And there's a big shift that happens through bioregional financing facilities between funders and regenerators, where, traditionally, regenerative projects have had to go through quite arduous application processes and reporting processes if they access grant capital, for example. And bioregional financing facilities aim to kind of aggregate some of those activities so the regenerators can get on with their work, and it's much more, kind of trust-based and seamless. Fourth is that bioregional financing facilities are transparent and enable empowered participation. Just what we were discussing about wanting to participate in civic life in our bioregions. Bioregional financing facilities absolutely have to support that. Sixth is that they leverage an integrated capital structure that embeds regenerative principles. We've talked quite a lot about this. Seventh is that they treat growth and returns as a means, but not an end. This is critical, right? Capital supremacy and market fundamentalism is driving our current economic system. And it's a really broken way of deploying resources. And in the case of bioregional financing facilities, in the bioregional investment company, for example, returns can be set as a constraint, but they are not the objective. The objective is achieving those other non-financial returns. And growth, likewise, there can be a need for an organization to grow, but it should not grow in perpetuity, and it should not grow in a way that is not serving its purpose. 8 is that they raise from mission-aligned funders and investors. This is really important. I've seen so many well-intentioned, nature-focused or justice-focused funds set out a really ambitious vision at the start, and then they say, oh, but if we want to raise capital, we have to make these changes. And I am making a provocation that there is capital out there that will align with what bioregional financing facilities can deliver. And the bioregional financing facilities should lay out a clear vision for achieving integrated returns and find funders and investors that are aligned with that. 9 is that they provide aggregation and matchmaking. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, this is a key role for bioregional financing facilities, is that they organize a synergistic web or portfolio of projects in the bioregion. And through bioregional financing facilities, investors can invest in a portfolio of projects where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, because these entities are working together. And 10 is that they apply an integrated approach to sensing and MRV. And I have another Tyson Yunkaporta quote here I would love to read. Tyson says, "It's not about Western knowledge and systems or their indigenous alternatives being dominant. This moment calls for bridging and co-design for the thriving of all of life." And that is exactly what I recommend bioregions use as their basis for designing MRV strategies. 11 is that bioregional financing facilities invest in storytelling, and this can look like many different things. Bioregional financing facilities and how they organize projects and deploy capital are telling new stories about what finance is meant to do. Bioregional financing facilities can tell stories to their funders and investors about that place and the impact that their capital is having there. They can support storytelling in the bioregion between the citizens in the bioregion about the geologic history of that place, the indigenous history of that place, what healing and reconciliation looks like. So the potential to invest in storytelling is multi-layered, but really critical. And finally, bioregional financing facilities should engage in partnerships, place-based citizen stewardship, and the community of practice. And this is one of the things I'm really excited about, is that we'll be launching a community of practice on Hilo. I know there's an interview on the MAR platform with Tibet Sprague from Hilo. Hilo is an amazing pro-social social media platform that's held in the Commons, and we will be stewarding a community of practice on the platform focused on BioFi. And this is a place where bioregional organizing teams, bioregional financing facility governance teams from around the world can come together and share what they are learning, share challenges and questions and resources and tools and templates, and tell me what in the book was working for them and what's not working, and we can evolve together.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So is that really the next step? Is this community of practice coalescing around bioregional financing, BioFi? And, can you elaborate on where do you see some of the early prototypes emerging for these facilities, and which bioregions are you starting to calibrate with and attune with?
Yeah, I'm very excited for the community of practice, and that is just one of the initiatives under a new collective that I'm launching called the BioFi Project. I am very excited to be co-founding the BioFi Project with my dear friend and collaborator, Edward West, the founder of Hilo. And Edward and I and an amazing team of colleagues are organizing under this umbrella of the BioFi Project to then hear from bioregions what we can do to support them in designing, building, and implementing bioregional financing facilities. And we are raising grants right now to support us to go and be of service in those places, to start to create these new financial institutions for the bioregional movement. And through that process, we will help them with determining which bioregional financing facility is right to start with. We can help matchmake them with potential capital providers. I'm building relationships with, as I mentioned, philanthropists, but also investors that are interested in capitalizing these facilities. And then we're also looking at building software to support capital allocation. And we're really interested in quadratic funding. I know Ma Earth is doing some beautiful work in the world of grant provision and quadratic funding right now. Looking forward to learning together with you on that. And we will, listen to every bioregional organizing team to determine how we can best be of service to support their mission and vision. And I am already anticipating that we will have more interest from bioregions than our small team can possibly meet. And so that's where the community of practice comes in, and many amazing partners of the BioFi Project that we'll be working with closely, including the Buckminster Fuller Institute, which is also serving as our fiscal sponsor, the Open Future Coalition, Dark Matter Labs. They were co-authors, and they're going to be doing this work under a new entity that they're creating called Dark Matter Capital. They're also looking at building funds that could eventually invest in bioregional financing facilities. Open Future Coalition is building an Open Future Fund, which is interested in investing in these as well. Ethic will be a key partner. I'm sure we'll have some amazing legal partners to support us on all the rights of nature, legal and governance stuff. And so that's kind of how we're envisioning it rolling out right now. And one of the initial pieces of software we're hoping to build is a platform that enables bioregions to start programs for bioregional tithing. So kind of like a voluntary taxation scheme where bioregions, as they start to tell stories about this place that is the bioregion and invite people to reconnect with that place, they can invite people to make financial contributions to bioregional regeneration and then play a role in voting as to how that capital is allocated.
And one more question: when BFF token?
Anytime, Matthew. Yeah.
I can see
the
it
possibilities
now.
are endless.
Liquidity pools with community staking that goes into the bioregions. Yeah, we'll have fun with that one. Well, Sam, it's an incredible body of work. Of course, it builds on a movement, a lineage. There's so many people who have been pointing to aspects of this, and for them and their work, I'm very grateful. I know we're very grateful. But it does feel like an idea whose time has come, and I really appreciate how the paper just puts scaffolding and becomes a bit more of a reference guide. And I think that people will benefit from it, whether you're doing bioregional regenerative work. I think you can use this paper to, fine-tune some of the ideas, to see case studies around the world, to give language to some of the shared impulse that we all feel in our local regions. If you're in finance and traditional finance, I think this research provides just an overwhelming number of ideas and practical, tangible ways that we can start to invest differently and with more imagination and with more impact. I think if you're in the Web3 space, this is just this is like candy. There's so many things here that fit within the patterns of decentralization that lend themselves well to token models, DAOs, staking. There's so much here. If you're in the local food movement, I think that this offers a lot of frameworks that rhyme with the issues that we see in this centralization of food, the need for bioregional food facilities, the need for relocalization and resilience of our food system, but also hand in hand, how does that infrastructure and work get funded? So anyway, it's just to say, I think there's a lot of different ways into this work, and a lot of folks can benefit from it. So thank you for being the one to kind of bring it together and to pull it together for the rest of us to learn from.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. And on that note, I have a list here of the multifaceted audience that we are targeting with this paper. And there is a call to action section at the end where we have specific recommended actions, invitation to actions for each of these. So I'm just going to read it out really quickly. Bioregional organizers, definitely. Regenerators and indigenous nations and tribes. Investors, philanthropists, policymakers at the national level, policymakers at the local level, multilaterals and development agencies, innovators, technologists, and futurists, economists and financial services experts, storytellers, artists and designers, and academics. So I really believe there's a role for everyone to play in this work. And as you've said, I feel that the bioregional movement has a surge of energy right now, maybe unlike anything it's seen before. And I have created this book to be in service to that movement, to resource that movement, to enable it to catalyze regenerative action around the world at a time when many people are feeling quite hopeless. I believe that the bioregional movement can bring renewed energy to our purpose in stewarding this beautiful earth that we get to call home.
Well, thank you so much, Samantha. Really appreciate you launching the paper with us and bringing this body of work. Any final words or closing thoughts?
Thank you for having me, Matthew. Thank you for being such a champion for this work and reading through my more than 100 pages that I wrote on this. And I'd love to read a few lines from the conclusion of the paper, if that's okay with you. We feel that there is an order to the changes currently emerging from the disorder of our current social and economic systems. Just as ecosystems regenerate through phases of resource exploitation, conservation, release, and reorganization, our socioeconomic systems can do the same. Just as clouds gather and disperse, so too has capital gathered, and now is finding its way to flow back to life and to the humans stewarding it. That is how I feel about what is happening, what is unfolding in the work right now. And it is my hope that this research paper and the BioFi Project can support that.
Samantha Power, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Links to the paper are in the show notes below, as well as to the many resources and projects that were referenced in this conversation. For more of our body of work, just go to maearth.com. We are here to amplify the voices of this regenerative economy movement and BioFi movement. So we appreciate you tuning in, and I'll see you next time.